right, guys, welcome back to the League Community Podcast. I'm Adilla Most Dirty, and with me as co-host today is the one and only Greg Ghostcrawler Street. For this episode, we want to dive into the thing that's on everybody's minds lately, namely the 2016 season update. And for that purpose, we are lucky enough to have Andre Medler Van Roon and Brad Certainly Team Wenbam with us, both working on parts of the update. Gonna get to know them a little bit before chatting about their perspective. Hopefully you guys listening in have already read up on the details, so we're actually planning to take a little bit of a broader kind of background look at the gameplay updates. Greg, you want to explain that a bit further?
Yeah, preseason is a big opportunity for us to fix a lot of things that have kind of been bothering us and bothering players about the game over time. It's an opportunity to add some depth to areas of the games that are maybe feeling a little shallow at the moment. And it's kind of our safe environment to experiment a little bit now that the ranked season has ended and the new one hasn't kicked off yet.
Well, good stuff. All right, let's get to know you guys a tiny bit before we jump into the meat. Greg, what exactly do you do here?
I lead game design on League of Legends. We have a lot of game designers on a lot of different teams working on a ton of different projects. Work at Riot can be a little chaotic sometimes, so I try to just make sure I know what's going on, make sure the design quality stays high, and that we're headed in the right direction.
Awesome. Sounds very needed. What about you, Brad?
I design and update champions. Right now I'm on the champion update team. Yep.
Good stuff. Andre?
I'm the lead designer for a group we call Core Gameplay at Riot.
Okay.
That's sort of a combination of 4 teams that work on new champions, game balance, champion updates, and sort of bigger system changes like vision and items, that sort of thing.
Okay, awesome. So I guess to start it off, Greg, I mean, the big question I have is just, I think you alluded to this a little bit, but just why preseason? Obviously we have balance changes all the time. Why do we pick this period to just really, throw a ton of change out at players?
I mean, there's a couple of reasons at this point. We've set a little bit of expectation. We've done preseason now for several years, and players kind of expect it. One of our design values for League is the idea of evolution, that this is a curated experience. This is not a fire and forget game that, once players shortcut the
Once it's solved, it's done.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense.
I totally stumbled over words there.
No, it's okay, Greg. You're okay.
We're putting that in.
Absolutely.
And the spit.
Yes, absolutely. Andre, why don't you explain that a little bit more, though? Like, what's so anathema about things being solved?
Yeah, so we sort of want a game that's basically an ongoing challenge. There's always something sort of new to explore, to discover. And we also think that LoL's a game where there's still a lot we can be improving. That sort of shakes things up. So as Greg mentioned earlier, we don't want to be doing that during sort of the middle of the normal ranked or
Gotcha.
Professional competitive period.
Well, there's definitely a concept this time of trying to bundle some changes together, right? You want to maybe talk a little about how if we're going to change the marksman, we also want to change the marksman items. And
Actually, good point. And so something we'd been interested in doing for a while this year was sort of looking at entire classes of character.
Mm-hmm.
We started off with sort of a trial with 4 of the Juggernauts and a couple of items, Dead Man's Plate and Black Cleaver for them. And we're sort of interested in doing that on a bigger scale and tackling one of the sort of most similar feeling classes. We've got a lot of marksmen that basically do fairly similar things.
Oh, okay. And what you guys are saying is essentially because that also required pretty significant item updates in this case, as contrasted with Juggernauts, that just wasn't something we were really comfortable doing in the middle of a season, just because the level of change was just so much greater.
well, to be fair, we did change a lot of the Juggernaut items.
Yeah, that's true.
Same time we changed the Juggernauts.
The marksman item changes are definitely on a bigger scale again than the Juggernaut stuff.
Yeah.
This feels more holistic reevaluation of the class. Like, we have changes for every marksman, even if they're smaller, and basically every item was either completely remade or it received substantial updates, whereas with Juggernauts, we changed 4 of them and added some new items, but we didn't do a complete refactor of the existing ones. And I think that meant that things weren't as smooth because you had the old and the new butting heads sometimes. Here, I think we've been able to do a lot of like balance and assessment of the play of all of the champions against one another in a way that I think players will enjoy more.
Yeah, we had a lot of meetings early on. I mean, starting months ago, of high-level things we kind of wanted to hit. And I sat down with some of the leads. We agreed, hey, let's work on marksman, but we left it up to the team to decide which marksman they would touch. It ended up being all of them, and how they would do that, and kind of what the goals for differentiating them were. Was COG going to be more of a magic damage, or is it going to be more of an artillery, or is it going to be more of the glass cannon, and kind of sharpening those differences?
We're also sort of trying to set up for some of the work ahead in the coming year as well. We're tackling marksman here. We'd like to tackle another class or two in sort of the first half of 2016 if we can.
Gotcha.
Haven't figured out which ones yet. I know sort of Brad and co are still bashing around ideas whether that's
like offensive tanks, or maybe like assassins.
Mm-hmm.
Those two come to the front.
So
discussions.
So is roster is kind of like, are these kinds of changes where we kind of bundle a class and take some pretty serious swings at like new mechanics and stuff like that? Is that it's a relatively new thing? We hadn't seen it before. Juggernauts. Is that the way of the future?
Well, I think that's still up in the air. How these marksman changes are received and whether they have a positive effect on the game will probably shape some of our attitude toward it. Personally, I think it's a great way to make change because, in particular, roster projects are about differentiating champions from one another and lumping champions together with their most similar counterparts enables us to quickly get to the meat of like why one champion may be too similar to another. So if we did a more scattershot approach or just took maybe the lowest hanging fruit at the individual champion level, we might inadvertently be making one champion less similar to another, but more similar to someone else.
Gotcha.
So sort of shifting Corky so he's less like Israel, but more like Graves or whatever it
That's the risk you could go to, if you were just thinking about the individual. But when we look holistically at all champions that sort of perform a certain function in the game, it's helped us to resolve some of those problems.
So now doing entire classes also means we can then go and look at their items, adjust those.
Yeah, it's
as an
super
entire
helpful
group,
for surrounding teams.
and then adjust the characters to go with the items again.
Yeah. The game systems team is doing this big overall haul for marksman items actually almost independently of us. And so we acted, in some ways they acted as a service team to us because we'd be like, hey, it's really hard to make champions that do anything when everyone has to buy Infinity Edge first, right? And in a lot of ways we acted as a service team for them because they were like, we want to bind champions to certain stats so that there's a path of items or 3 paths of items. There's more than just a single path of items that makes sense for you, and you make some choices within there.
Sure. No, we did some of that with the Juggernauts as well, didn't we?
Yeah, definitely we did. One thing we did was we upped their base AD relative to their ratios, and that made items like Sterix. That made Sterix better on them in Trinity Force. And we also generally identified those sort of Juggernauts, offensive, tanky people as wanting to scale with health because they generally can't afford to build exactly the right defensive item for the right situation since they just sort of wade in and everyone beats on them.
Hence sort of Titanic Hydra as a
correct
offense-defense combination.
Yep.
So here's a question players may be wondering about. When we took on fighters, we agreed that there were subclasses of fighters. There's juggernauts and maybe divers and maybe some type of light fighter that we'll get to. What about marksmen? Do we think there are subclasses of marksmen?
I don't. I think that marksman is a relevant unit of analysis. The roster team spent some time sort of thinking about what the at a strategic level of in-game functionality was a relevant way to bifurcate classes. That said, I think there are some people that we think of as marksmen that aren't what our class definition is. So Graves as a short range, risky champion who isn't attacking continuously. He might be more similar in nature to a Yasuo or a Riven, actually. Conversely, someone who's really long range like Ezreal, he may actually be more similar to sort of an artillery piece that bombards you for a really long time from outside of your range. So he would fit closer to Xerath or Jace in that regard.
So maybe breaking down the concept a little bit that marksman equals ADC equals duo bottom lane, and that's the only place you can play.
We've also got some of those characters who can play in multiple sort of different positions or roles. Israel mid tends to build and play differently to Israel bot, who's doing the more sort of traditional ADC carry thing. We see the same sort of thing with Varus.
Yeah.
as you say, they're kind of more like the AP cog, the just mage like sort of player, bombard them from range versus in there auto attacking constantly.
Yeah, and they're really good picks with like strong disengage against teams that don't have that engage potential. Whereas I think a marksman is, as we define it, is more comfortable with team fights actually breaking out. Whereas Varus would love for the fight to never actually begin, so he can poke you out indefinitely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty intrigued by you guys. Weirdly, like you are, from my perspective, relative layman on this. You guys are increasing that definition. I'm definitely getting much more of a sense of like, oh man, I want to play this guy because I'd like to do this specific thing with him rather than shoot you with my eye edge. But it also interestingly is you're making me think of like how you're kind of blending the lines between them as well. Like the fact that it doesn't have to be guy with gun or bow is a 500 to 600 range attacker who hits you in this way. The fact that like it makes me think, oh yeah, Thresh actually does have a range attack, and then we're almost moving Graves in that direction of he's still ranged, it's much shorter, and that's going to have like really wide you're going to create a much wider ecosystem among this relatively like straightforward class beforehand, I would say.
Potentially. Yeah. I the only thing I would disagree with is I'd say our players are going to create a much wider ecosystem.
Good point.
Hopefully we've given you guys out there the tools to do that. But that is just this approach is more about giving players the tools to potentially find new strategies at the team level to win a game of League, and less about sort of prescribing a new way to win in particular, because I have no idea whether Graves will be an overpowered jungler or a really good bot laner or
a really niche bot laner.
Yeah. We have some data from our internal playtests and a little bit from PBE that he does function in bot lane, but you never quite know.
So that's actually a good question. If we're talking about giving players more flexibility, if they can kind of choose items depending on the comp or the situation, is that going to end up feeling like a net buff to marksmen because now they can kind of build the strengths they want rather than just the strengths that we kind of assign them?
Almost certainly, I think. When you're playing Misfortune and you don't have to start, like when you can buy the right item for the right situation, your gold is going to a higher value use, even if you have less AD than you did before the items were available. I think it's very empowering and that marksmen feel great, partially as a result of that. The caveat is that they only feel great if you actually thought about the item you should buy in the situation. I've had tons of games, particularly at the start of our internal testing of this, where I literally just did the same thing I do on live and I got hammered. And now that I'm adjusting and building, a Mercurial Scimitar when it makes sense, or choosing the right penetration item for the composition of the enemy team, I'm feeling a lot better about the champions.
I know I'm gonna have issues there. I already like you look at something like rapid fire cannon, and it's like ooh shiny. It's gonna be very hard for me to not just constantly be building that or various other items that have splashy effects.
That's the tragedy of PvP games, right? Is that you're pressured to optimize, but hopefully.
I'm excited to have the choice, though.
I mean, that's also kind of what the preseason's for.
Sure.
It's that period of experimentation of trying out that sort of random stuff and.
So we've talked a bunch about ADC marksman, excuse me, forbidden term, and as well as their items. There's just some other items that are going to affect them as everybody, as well as hopefully everybody else in the game. Along the lines you talked about having something in preseason for everybody to get excited about. And I'm talking about those starting items. All those weird new potions and interesting new mechanics on previously pretty straightforward stat sticks to start the game off with. What are we going for there? Just high level.
We've got a few different things we're trying. We sort of want each role or each position to have a couple of items they can think about depending on what they're after. So on a bot lane, if you want sort of normal PvP power, Doran's Blade's still a really solid choice. If you want to play really defensively and just farm, or think you can just control the lane, we've got a new item called Cull that gives you bonus gold for each minion kill and a bunch more when you sort of cap it out. Similar sort of experience in mid lane. Doran's Ring is sort of the farming item. A new item called Dark Signet.
Oh,
or Dark Seal or something similar.
I still think of it by the previous name we had.
Oh, what was that? What was that?
It was Noxian something.
Yeah, it was Noxian Signet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do you guys hate Noxians? God.
Hate those guys. No, so Noxian Signet, which is sort of more a mini sort of Magi Soul Stealer. So it's sort of that snowball, I want to roam and gank other lanes sort of item. That sort of thing.
So part of the design of like the whole Doran's brand of items was, oh, this is a pretty safe first pick that you're not going to end up regretting. You're not going to dig yourself a hole. Are we worried now that players are going to like lose the game with their first item pick?
I don't think so. I actually think we were really cautious with the new starting items, and
Of course
the
you did,
Doran's
right?
items are really, really still safe bets. If you didn't know about Call-in Noxian Signet, you'd be able to do just fine. You're missing out on a situational optimization, but yeah, a lot of the feedback we got in playtesting that the systems team got was, it's so early in the game. This choice I made before I even made my first move on the map, it regretted later. And you don't really know much about your opponent yet. You don't know if you're facing, the really good Riven or the Riven that you get to smash in lane at that point. And so buying a Magi's, right, when that's still up in the air is a dicey proposition.
So sort of getting some variety into that sort of first 5 to 10 minutes in lane without deciding too much before it's...
Yeah, and they faced a challenging task. And so the items are, ideally, I think they're more about you than about your opponent. Whereas an item like Doran's Shield was, in a lot of ways, more about your opponent than you. And I really like... Although I do think this is too cautious, I like the direction of this being an expression of how you plan to play the lane rather than how you plan to react to the particulars of the opponent you haven't seen yet.
If those starting items go well, that's also something we could sort of expand on a bit, either during the coming season or middle of the year or something.
Yeah, I have to think starting items are like oddly underexplored, given that they're one of the few things you do every game, no matter what happens.
And they're the item system for you for a significant chunk of the game.
Yeah.
And if you need more information about what the enemy's doing, you can just put green wards all over the map.
Oh,
Too soon.
Bad news, Greg.
Too soon. Okay, well that's a hell of a segue. What so Vision's a super fundamental thing, Greg. Why are you messing with that?
There are a lot of ways to express vision in League. Probably too many. And so one of the goals for the preseason was, let's look at all the different ways that players have for vision and talk about, do we really need them all? Are we getting interesting decisions out of them? Are we just kind of clogging up the store? Are we making vision too easy? And I'll let these guys talk a little about, our thought process of why particularly the changes to green wards and sight stones and things like that.
Yeah, one of the biggest things we wanted to do with the whole Greenwood thing was to decouple the vision game somewhat more from what you're spending gold on. Early game, making you more reliant on sort of trinkets for wards, with yellow trinket now starting with 2 charges, and making pinks a bit cheaper as well if you need another sort of longer term source of vision to throw down.
Mm-hmm. So the Lees and the Katarinas of the world don't have to worry about ward hopping being more expensive.
They'll still do their thing.
We'll stop them.
Yep.
Wards are now 1,000 gold. Lee play is unaffected.
I also think increasingly we recognize that, it used to be like, oh, buying wards is that way to get out of, silver or something. Where you place your wards, how you use your vision is now the real battle lines in terms of progression. And so I'm very comfortable with the fact that we've, removed the need to stop progressing your item fantasy and start buying wards and replace that with how are you going to use the finite set of vision tools available to you most effectively.
So testing where I sweep.
When I sweep.
I put down a ward charge, as opposed to, do I know I should be buying wards in the first place? Yes, no?
Yeah.
Wow.
But focusing that's always been the test, right? But I think we've discovered that almost every player is so far from optimal vision, warding and optimal sweeping that there's still a ton of depth, maybe even more, to giving you a fixed amount of vision.
And listen, another good segue there is because we made another small change to provide a little more information about where the other team or maybe even the players on your team are warding.
Oh, the ward rubble?
Yeah.
Or ruins or whatever we're calling them?
Ward corpses.
Why you gotta be like that? Ward corpses? Jesus.
Look, green wards are dead.
Are you guys telling me wards have feelings and souls and personas?
Yeah, there's a movie from Pixar about
That's
it.
exactly what we said. Yes.
Man.
So basically, enemy wards, when they vanish, will sort of leave a little bit of rubble on the ground at the point they were placed at for, I think it's about 10 minutes.
Okay.
And so basically, if you're sort of walking around and you're seeing some of these around, you'll start to, if you're paying attention, build up an understanding of where the enemy team's been warding. So you're sort of able to think, okay, maybe I should pink ward that spot or use a sweeper in this brush. Or possibly, I'm not seeing any of these things. The enemy team's being really terrible with vision. We should try and take Baron or be more aggressive with their jungle, that sort of thing.
So clearly I'm not good enough at this game because you guys have blown my mind like 4 times already, and I kind of even know what we're talking about already. But with the ward corpses, that to me is a great example of like something I would have never thought of in a million years, as a player myself. Is that something that just somebody had a cool idea one day and you're like, that neatly solves some problems we had? Or was that actually we need to accomplish this and then figuring out that ward corpses are the way to do that?
No, I think it is a problem we have understood for a while, that what the enemy is doing with the vision game is largely invisible to you as an opponent. The solution to that was very plainly not making all wards visible, because we love the uncertainty generated through not knowing all the time whether you're being watched. And so an approach, I think that led very logically in Zephyrus's mind to, okay, when the ward expires, we will reveal where it was placed so that you're always playing against perfect information of where the enemy warded 5 minutes ago. But now you don't know.
Built-in spectator delay, something like that.
Bingo.
Terrible analogy? I don't know.
Yeah, pretty similar.
As usual.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, wow. All right, good stuff. So, we're talking here about those things that really affect everybody. I'm curious. You guys were talking a bit about breadth, about you're entering into a game of League of Legends. Something on the list of changes is going to affect you, no matter where you are. What I'm seeing as well, just thinking about it now, is that there's almost actually as well a kind of breadth of change in the other direction, i.e. from the moment you jump into game, or the moment you're even getting ready to play the game with masteries, all the way until relatively end game things where you're talking about like optimizing your marksman and stuff like that in the vision game. Was that as well kind of a breadth thing that you guys were going for when kicking off this preseason?
That one was more sort of an organic and fortunate thing.
Okay.
We do spend quite a bit of time looking at sort of the different phases of the game. The pre-minion spawn invade.
Sure.
Early laning, sort of the mid-game when you're taking towers and scrapping over dragon. Then sort of the late-game team fighting and sieging. Wasn't particularly an explicit goal this year to sort of really try and nail down each of those phases, but now that you pointed out, it's great that we've got something.
We'll
in most
take
of them.
it, yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm a genius. Not as bad at this game as I thought. Okay, awesome. Well, there's one more thing that we had to talk about that really affects everybody, and it's the masteries. Jump us in there, Greg, because I have no idea what's going on.
Well, I do have a reputation for taking interesting systems in games and dumbing them down to just a few choices. So I know I'll get credit and blame for this regardless of who actually did the work.
So how did we get into that? Where did the whole idea, hey, we really got to mess with masteries, come from?
Our old mastery system is atrocious. Everyone knew it, and so it was obvious that it should be changed. I think no one felt like we could do the silver bullet solution in our present game client, and so we put off working on it. But finally, I think maybe Greg was the impetus here. Like
Ghostcrawler made us do it.
Ghostcrawler made us do it, right? And
made us do it.
And thank you very much.
Okay, awesome. Good job, Greg.
I mean, it's just, there are a lot of small passive changes in there. Almost every player just adapts a build or looks it up and stops interacting with the system again after that.
I know I do.
Yeah.
I also don't think I've changed my runes since like season 2.
We'll get to runes too, but not this preseason.
And sort of biggest goal with the masteries was to make it so that we took all the sort of the gold, the power that was in them, and really concentrated most of that into a few meaningful ones.
Why?
We want stuff you can actually notice in game.
Okay. Oh, so that's the why?
Yeah, you can feel it, you can play around it, it'll influence your choice. You care which masteries you have, your teammates have, your enemies have, rather than just selecting 921 at the start and forgetting about them after that.
Sure. Do you guys think there will be more variability in these? I feel like there's usually one, maybe 2 ways to set up your masteries for a champion currently. Do you think there's actually gonna be a little more variety in that way of like, how do I want to approach this game with single champions?
I don't think we had very much under the previous system.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I'm pretty sure we will get at least some
okay,
more.
so there's at least some more.
Comparative questions, throw those out the window. Again, the old mastery system was terrible. And I'm sorry, you guys, that, to all our players, like, I'm sorry we gave you that for so long. But we don't know, right? Whether players will solve this and we'll look back and be like, what? All of those the optimal runes or masteries. That's so obvious, right? In hindsight, that's one thing. We now have a framework in place where it's like,
Gotcha.
hey, you're making a meaningful decision between these 3 choices in front of you, and they're mutually exclusive. That gives us the ability to iterate on them, make it so that they are things that on a game by game or champion by champion basis, you'll make different calls on.
Yeah, so, I mean, we'll need to do a bunch of balance work on those to follow up on them. Potentially during the season, we might want to add a couple of new ones somewhere as well. If we've got, hey, this type of, let's say, caster support just doesn't have the right sort of masteries in certain trees.
Yeah, and there's the space there to make those additions. So,
like, philosophically, I really want to call out that we strive not to just make change for the sake of change, that we really are trying to add depth to systems that lack it. That's kind of the promise of League of Legends, that you have to be smart, you have to make good decisions. And because, I mean, for a lot of reasons, partially because the game has developed so quickly and grew fast, we've accrued a lot of design debt, and you see it in some of the older champions. You definitely see it in systems like Runes and Mastery. So those are ripe opportunities for us to go in and try to make them something players can actually engage with, rather than being, why do I have to do this kind of brain dead step before I can jump into a game?
I guess I've never thought about it like that. That's kind of that. I think about it a lot. I guess a similar thing now that I'm thinking about it with champion updates, where it's like, oh God, how do you even catch up essentially? Because by the time you've updated X number, all of a sudden ones that weren't outdated now are. I guess I hadn't considered the fact that can exist throughout the game experience. Actually,
I do think so maybe in terms of like art, that might be true. Like we didn't have as many polygons per model in the past. Gameplay is more timeless. And in some ways, there are many more modern champions that I think would be great candidates for champion updates.
And there's some older champions that are in pretty good shape.
They're in great shape,
yeah,
right?
that don't need it.
Yeah.
If you're a Nivea's or your
your
Amumu's.
Right. And so, maybe they could use some small changes, just because a lot of our approach to like micro level design has changed. Maybe, their casts could feel more impactful at that moment, but the core of their gameplay is really solid, and something that I think, some of our new champions could learn from. So it's not just about modernization. I think that's not what Champion Update ought to be about, and it's not what it is about. But we have so many champions and the release cadence is slowed, that it feels like we work on the older ones more.
Sure. All right. Well, there was one quite big thing that we still haven't we talked about it a little bit at the beginning, but haven't fully dove into. The Herald, I think, is the name right now. Yes,
it was Duchess originally, because we knew that it wanted to precede Barons. That was our in joke until we knew exactly what the art was going to look like. But now it's Herald.
So where did that come from? I mean, I guess that's again just kind of one of those things. There's already a monster there. Who the heck had the idea? We haven't done anything like that, right? Who the heck had the idea to put a mob in another mob spot?
Every preseason, there's something in that.
One more jungle camp every time.
It was Rift Scuttler last time.
By preseason 13, we're going to be putting monsters in the base.
In the shop.
I pitched that this preseason, by the way.
Are you kidding me?
No, it's like the safe camp.
What the hell? I want to see.
Of course, there's probably a reason we didn't do that.
I want to see my proposal for the next preseason doc by Brad. Certainly, Team Webvan.
You'd really don't.
And even with Rift Herald, right? We went through a lot of iteration. We tried. The goal you guys can talk about was to help top feel like less of an island. I mean, we know some players really like the duel between two top laners, but it felt so far removed from the rest of the strategy for the game post laning.
I mean, basically, as Greg says there, we wanted to start off by effectively giving some more options to top laners, rather than always go there, farm safely, teleport down for dragon fights, or if you're in a really high tier game, maybe rotating with your bot lane sometimes. Want to get some more reward for winning that, for meeting up with your jungler.
Sure. So it started off like literally just as a problem statement, it sounds like.
Yeah, and we looked at a few different options.
Okay.
Sort of first one was, hey, can we mess with sort of minion waves? Maybe have them smaller waves that spawn more often, that sort of thing.
Only in top.
Only in top.
Interesting.
Didn't sort of feel that hit the mark. We then explored sort of a shrine a little bit like the Twisted Tree Line ones, in sort of the middle of the middle brush in top lane. Sort of a thing to fight over and control. That sort of became a really sort of snowbally thing. You just constantly pushed, bullied the other person, took control of that, never gave it up. It was a pretty sort of, to be honest, dull experience.
Okay.
And something else that got pitched though was, hey, let's try putting a creature in the Baron pit. the map's sort of really weighted towards the bottom. There's more people down there. There's this significant objective in Dragon. What if we put something up there to sort of pull people up or to make it more valuable to control this part of the map?
And it's just empty until Baron spawns.
Sure. No, I mean, again, it's a case of, well, that makes a lot of sense, actually. It's just not something we would have thought ahead of time. The interesting thing for me there is that the design of this creature seems to have been a very purposeful, we need it to provide this sort of challenge. Whereas I've always felt personally like a lot of the other mobs are kind of just intended to present variety, not necessarily a specific problem or anything like that.
Well, they're
Maybe
just
I'm wrong.
DPS tests.
Yeah,
right?
And it's like this one is this version where the balance between the big mob and the smaller mobs is X percentage, and then a different one. But this guy requires a fundamentally different approach. Why'd you guys go for that?
Basically, if you brought 2 people, you're much more than just twice as effective. You've got one person tanking the thing and the other backstabbing it, getting those really large, hundreds of true damage procs going on. Sort of play up the teamwork thing to,
Sure.
Address some of that top lane as an island feeling.
Yeah, I guess
We
that
didn't
makes
want
sense.
just one more camp for the jungler to deal with as part of their, rotation.
Sure. Is this kind of a case though? Again, Brad, you've been saying a ton here that like ultimately the players are the metric. In the end for
this is the most dangerous change of the preseason in terms of us not knowing the exact consequences of it. And I applaud Jeevan, Riot Jag, for being confident enough to do that.
Sure.
I mean, who knows? It's a very powerful buff it gives, right? It's in terms of offensive function of minions around you, it is a Baron buff.
And we're seeing a ton of speculation from players that, they're just going to invert and put dual lane at the top and send the current top guy down to the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah, I think taking aggressive mids that can push the wave in and give you more access to it, because I think you can take it a little faster. It is very damaging, but you can take it faster than the dragon, in my experience. So, yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how players make use of it. And I don't think the things we're doing are the optimal way to make use of the buff, right? Yeah, internally.
Maybe you could talk a little about at what stage would we step in and patch it versus just, hey, players figured this out this particular way, so we're just going to let it go.
Gosh, I mean, I think there is like players find the optimal way. That doesn't mean that players get to keep that optimal way, right? You get your, month and a half of raking in lots of wins because you've figured out how to abuse the system, whether it's AP Tryndamere or some cool use for the Herald. My feeling though is we patch it if it's leading to staleness. It's like we always know how to deal with this Rift Herald every time, right? We adopt this strategy of the jungler just camps the top lane incessantly, and then you work over that. Or it's leading to a breakdown in other elements of the game, right? So theoretically, you could end the game at like 15 minutes on the back of Rift Herald if the other team doesn't have a ton of wave clear and you have great push. That's not ideal if it's happening a lot of the time, right?
Sure.
So if it's really interrupting the rest of the game flow, that I think necessitates us stepping in.
If it's making the game less interesting.
Right. So basically, if the decision itself is really dry and boring, or if it's heavily impacting other decisions that you make in the game. And I think when explained that way, like a lot of the stuff we do to take away strategies from players that they've sort of come to love actually seems really reasonable, right? We're not boogeymen.
So super important question that players ask me all the time is, will Baron in fact eat Rift Herald if he's still there when Baron spawns?
Yeah, long term, we'd love to do that. We won't have that in for preseason.
I mean, makes sense. You guys are, from everything it sounds like, these are intentionally not like overdone changes necessarily, but you guys are intentionally pushing the limits, and in many cases we'll have to tune, balance all of those things going forward. I guess that's comforting for me to hear, because just given the level of change here, it's easy to be like, it's easy to perceive these things as so final when in fact, as you guys have mentioned repeatedly, these are foundational steps going forward. So you guys have talked here. I mean, this really seems to, from everything I'm hearing, have been our most ambitious and kind of pre-planned, pre-thought out approach to a preseason yet.
It is exciting and terrifying.
I'm sure necessarily there's been a ton of challenges, hiccups, course corrections, that type of thing. You've talked about some of them, but I guess just, what were some of the things where it was like, holy crap, that was done wrong early on, or things that we had to change, very quickly in the process of doing all this?
Well, one thing we were experimenting for a time with a plan to upgrade summoner spells. They ended up cutting for like lack of. Mostly worried about can we really deliver on this as well as all these other changes going in at the same time. It had, I think, some promise, and we may explore it again in the future. But
sure, I guess to some extent, once you're kind of these changes kind of multiply together, I guess, in terms of your guys' ability to like kind of test and see what normal is. So I mean, we're already doing some pretty fundamental changes. So if summoner spells are tacked onto that as well, it's
we can only play test so many times a day, and you can only test so many variables at the same time. If it's like 10 updated champions all buying brand new items and killing new creatures, your ability to detect what's working or not really goes downhill.
Sure. What about with the marksman? Like, how did we, pick the ones that we were working on? It seems like we've got those core 6, and then a couple other that are getting lighter touches. Just how did It sounded like we approached the class. Why did we pick those ones in particular?
Yeah. So within the class, we kind of did an analysis of like what was every marksman's thing, their unique reason for bringing them, and we saw a fair amount of overlap. And then our first gut was to be like, well, the more recently released one is like usurped that other champion's like role.
Gotcha.
But we stepped back from that, thankfully, and we thought about which champion has something really that would feel just right for them to contribute to winning the game that they're not getting right now. And so in the case like Graves and Lucian, we identify as high overlap. And we were like, okay, so what should we do to Lucian? I was like, wait a minute. It doesn't make any sense that the guy who actually feels like a dude with 2 pistols is being compared to the guy with a shotgun, right? And that there's something off about the guy with the shotgun in this case. And so that was really how we started, was looking at champions that at a strategic level either did too much, Jinx, or too little. And then we winnowed it down from there based on what we had ideas for and what the 3 designers on the team were like passionate about, because we wanted to work really we wanted to be fast and good. And so if there was a champion that we didn't have ideas for, we resolved not to force it. And I actually feel like some of our work on Juggernauts was forced. And here we said, if we don't get something massive for every marksman, let's just make sure we have something that players will really love for every marksman. And that's players not just of those champions, but in the entire game experience. So they'll be like, wow, I'm really glad we have a Corki on our on my team this game, or like, sure, wow, it's really stupid that the guy picked Corki on my team. and it's so obvious why, right? As opposed to like, doesn't he know he has 2% lower win rate? Yeah.
So knowing that we may have already changed things by the time this podcast airs, which marksman changes do you think are going to be the most controversial?
Definitely Graves.
Yeah, Graves will be a big one. Quinn will be a big one. The ones that will be low, I think Graves and Quinn stand out. They're the most substantial changes, and let's face it, for a lot of we spend so much time in the game and league that there's a sense of comfort you come to have in your favorite champion or champions, and so the biggest predictor of whether players will be upset is the size of the change, even above the quality of the change. Honestly, now I know changes that are bad also generate frustration, but the number one thing is just how big it is. And Graves and Quinn have the biggest ones. Hopefully, I think they're both really exciting changes that fundamentally make those champions able to, they give you capabilities that you can't get anywhere else.
I think one of the other things there is when those changes sort of feel cohesive and make sense with the character, I think we get a much more, understandably positive reaction.
Hopefully. I mean, that's just good design, right?
Yeah, Graves, we're playing up the shotgun thing. Fires a whole bunch of pellets. You can get up close in somebody's face and deal more damage. Doesn't have particularly long range. Sort of really cohesive fantasy going on there. You get why that's on sort of the manly ADC of Graves.
Are we playing up the mustache and cigar as well?
Oh, don't mention the cigar. I think by contrast,
Greg, you messed up.
I think by contrast, Skana from the previous set of updates actually was an example where we didn't get that particularly well. We added in sort of the crystals around the map to sort of give them something new to engage with. but doesn't feel as sort of tied to his core as, you know, the scorpion that goes in there and impales somebody and drags them out.
Yeah, getting really like nuts and bolts. Working on Marksman was a pleasure because for Skarner to do things like he needs new animations because he's melee, right? Whereas Graves, we can use a lot of the same particles and a lot of the same animations and update what's coming out of his gun. And so it gave us a lot more ability to work iteratively and to be confident that we could deliver final product. Now we did kill our VFX artist, Shannon, Riot Phoenix. Almost literally, she worked her butt off.
Yeah, there was it was one of the Corky skins, right? Where it was like, are we going to be able to get this done in time? And should we ship it without the update?
We actually, as a team, resolved that we weren't going to ship a Dragon Wing Corky in patch 522, the preseason. We're going to ship it later. And her and John Shirky, our two VFX artists, were like, no, that's not right at all. And they just developed a plan and worked
They just beast moded
tirelessly.
it. Yeah, that's awesome.
Shout out to the art guys. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's definitely something to keep in mind. And we get so excited here about the gameplay stuff going on, and because of the reason you mentioned, where some of these things can almost be co-opted into their new uses, and ideally kind of don't look overly different from what they used to look like. It's easy to forget how much art change is actually going into here.
Yeah, design gets a lot of credit, I think, and this is a fantastic design team, and I'm super proud of what we've been able to do. But it's a group effort. I mean, it takes QA, it takes engineering, it takes production and narrative. It's a lot of people go in working on a set of features this large.
Actually, just a question there for you, Brad. Again, sort of sticking with the nuts and bolts thing for a second. For whichever class we tackle next, do you think we should be sort of getting in more animation resources, or what could we do better there?
It's a good question. I actually think that the number one thing we could do is work with our artists to sort of choose a direction in terms of what class we're working on. Getting them all really as excited and passionate about the nature of the changes themselves as we are in design, I think will get everyone on the same page really early on. And with particularly the Juggernauts, we started doing all the work on them, and when we had them in place, we grabbed a bunch of artists and said, work with us. And oftentimes they were just confused as to what the heck we were doing, right? And that slowed our iteration, and I think made it not feel as great for them to work on. So going back just to some of our general Riot values of people are empowered and feel like a part of the team would be the number one thing. In terms of specific art stuff, I think we could always use more sound, I think. That would be just awesome. Animation is honestly just limited in a lot of ways by older rigs. And I don't think we can maintain the pace we work at with those.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, gosh.
Sorry, that really was nuts and bolts. But
yeah, no. I mean, it's just that's the interesting thing is if across spectrum, you would need 10 people at least to fully just do everything for a champion across the board, which I guess is the challenge with champ ups. But for this type of stuff, we were hitting so many people all at once. You're bound to have limitations there. Interesting. Well, okay, let's start wrapping things up. So, one big question I have is just to kind of cap things off. Just what are you guys personally excited for? Greg, I mean, you have apparently 6 months ago and obviously more recent been all right, guys, solve this problem. Good luck. What's been really cool for you to see come to fruition?
I mean, what's really rewarding for me is seeing stuff get in the hands of players. The reason I love working on a live game like League is that we ship pretty frequently and we try to keep the game updated. For me, game design is all about interesting decisions. And I love that we're at least attempting to put more decision making in the hands of players. Ideally, a great League player should have awesome reflexes, but also should be smart and should be able to make the right decisions giving the information. And those decisions shouldn't be super obvious or they're not interesting. So I'm super excited to see what players do, what comes up that we didn't expect, and watch them experiment with new masteries and playing champions at different positions. And it's going to be a really fun few months.
What about you guys on the other side of the table?
I'm pretty excited about the mastery system, particularly, as Greg says, seeing what people do with that, how they experiment, what sort of stuff they come up with, and then whether that gives us room to, to expand that, to add in other cool options, to support sort of other specific playstyles, that sort of thing.
Right?
Ooh, the changes focused on bot lane, I think, open it up a lot, but generally, actually Dylan told me he was going to ask this question, and so I thought about it for a while. This is the first preseason where I'm kind of excited about almost everything. I actually think the overall quality is really high, and part of that is that we set out very sort of designery goals, right? Like enable choice and decision making, and those are things that we're very comfortable doing when we focus on them, because that's literally what game design is. But oftentimes I think a lot of our goals have been much more tactical than that, right? Like change the jungle in ways that has these sort of nebulous goals, like no ganking before minute 4. And it's like
tweak turrets to discourage split pushing.
Yeah. And it's like, those are like in terms of like decision making, those are kind of anti-goals, right? They're not expressed as, well, what do you want people doing if they're not doing that? And maybe make a bunch of options there that are more attractive than rushing down a turret might have been a better way to phrase it. So I'm excited about most of the changes in this preseason, and I'm excited about, from a methodological perspective, how the various teams went about setting, and leadership, honestly, you guys went about setting us up to succeed.
That's really cool. Yeah, I feel dumb sitting here with my answer of I'm looking forward to wombo comboing with MF.
Yeah. I want to say one thing, which is that literally, in order to tune Misfortune's ult, like I was on the last day, Static, who did the rework, he just sat there and it was like, put the whole get full items, put the whole thing on someone, and they don't move out of it, and until they die, like 100 to 0 from the ult, if they don't have armor,
just
it's
at the
not
point of
tuned
death?
right. Yeah. And that was it. So you'll be a happy man, I think, if you're interested in Misfortune's ultimate being powerful.
Brad, I'm gonna cry.
I just want to see like Misfortune in high-ranking games and see her like taken seriously as an ADC, rather than being kind of like something that low tiers may experiment with, who kind of drops off. So hopefully we'll do that.
Yeah.